Good afternoon and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. My name is Juan Thomas, and I have the honor of serving as the 2022-23 chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section. And I'm so honored to have with me today for our weekly chair chat, two friends and colleagues who are going to talk about voting rights and the Fair Election Task Force. My dear friend, Dr. Cynthia Swain, is the co-chair of our task force this year, and our friend and member of the task force, Elizabeth M. Welcome and glad to have you both. How are you?
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Absolutely. Very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, it's good to see you both, even though we're virtual. Wish we could be in person. But I wanted to really jump into this topic because in less than a month, we all know voters across the country will be going to vote in our upcoming midterm elections. In many states, early voting has already started. And it's so important that we learn about the importance of the work of this task force. And so, Elizabeth and Cynthia, could you kind of share with us what is the Voting Rights and Fair Elections Task Force, and why is there a need for such a task force?
Cynthia, since you're the co-chair, I'll let you start with this one and chime in if that's okay.
That's very well. I can do that very well. Thank you. The Voting Rights and Fair Elections Task Force was created to really analyze and highlight and pursue promising solutions toward the elimination of barriers to voting rights and fair elections through strategic collaborations with those folks that are in the communities day in and day out doing the hard work of ensuring fair elections, making certain that election protection guidelines are in place, that access to the vote is available. And its charge cuts across and supports the subject matter addressed by all other civil rights and social justice committees that we work with collaboratively. Our task force members are very eager to increase the stature and visibility of CRSJ and the ABA. As a standing committee for fair elections and enabling all citizens to have access to, and all those who are eligible to vote have the ability to vote. So we are actively engaged in activities to prepare lawyers, nonpartisan organizations, as well as the general public to protect voting rights and ensure fair elections. I'd go on to say that we collaborate throughout the ABA, but we do external collaborations, which is the major objective of the Voting Rights and Fair Elections Task Force. And that is to make certain that we make connections with strategic collaborations with nonpartisan organizations, such as the Lawyers Committee, the Brennan Center, Campaign Legal Center, Common Cause, NAACP, and so many more. And some of the smaller, somewhat lesser known groups that are really much larger and much more engaged and informed and reaching a demographic that is often overlooked, such as those in the 18 to 30 age group, so to speak, and a group that is very representative of the work that is happening in those areas would be the Hip Hop Caucus. And people don't often think of that, but when you consider the work that a group such as the Hip Hop Caucus could do, and I've become more and more aware lately of the impact because they draw on and are closely connected with the community and the demographic that is really going to be able to impact and change elections going forward, beginning in 22 into 2024, and on all of the issues that are going to draw people to the work. And the task force is interested in connecting with groups like that because of the work that they're doing, whether it's around climate change, whether it's around accessibility, whether it's around returning citizens' ability to vote. These are issues that the organizations that were previously mentioned, as well as those that are delving deeper into the BIPOC communities, are able to engage in and affect change in.
Thank you for that. Elizabeth, do you want to add anything to that answer?
No, I think Cynthia is spot on. And then, not to jump the gun a little, but I think one of the, and maybe leading into your possible second question, if you don't mind, is the issues that Cynthia speaks about are so important. And toward that end, the Section on Civil Rights and Social Justice and this task force has created an initiative called Perfecting Democracy.
Right.
To sort of talk about how we as lawyers and the legal community can work together to make democracy better, right? And a huge part of making democracy better is this notion that, it's interesting. When our country first started, we the people was really only 6% of the population. And it was, white males who owned property. And what we've seen over the last 200 some years are these incremental steps forward to engage the franchise. And I think that's all what perfecting democracy is about. And I think while we've had, for a while, a really long, steady march that really culminated in the mid 60s with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, we in recent time have unfortunately seen steps backwards. And so that's why the importance of perfecting democracy is so important. And toward that end, as Cynthia mentioned, what we want to do is we want to create opportunities for members of the American Bar Association, for lawyers, law students, legal professionals, to find ways that we can keep that momentum going forward and stop the backsliding. So that's why I think it's really important. And it's an honor to be on the task force and do this work. But what we want to look at then through this is particularly in BIPOC communities and where we're talking about voting rights litigation, where we're talking about access to the polling places, and even in issues such as redistricting, because that's sort of really where it all starts. Redistricting, it starts at the local level as people are building the districts and setting the boundaries for how we elect our officials. And redistricting is also an issue we're looking at, because if at the start, the districts aren't drawn in a way that encourage and allow for equal participation, then we already start very much backwards. So, we want to work with, as Cynthia mentioned, these nonpartisan groups as they do what they're doing. So we're trying to recruit lawyers, law students, and legal professionals to help them with this work. And we understand that organizations such as the Lawyers Committee and others, the Brennan Center, the Campaign Legal Center, Common Cause, MALDA, Asian Americans Advance, all these groups have been doing the work that they've been doing for quite some time, and they're very good at it. So we also want to be really clear that we're not trying to do their work. What we want to do is we want to provide them with volunteers that can assist their work. So we sort of feel well placed as the American Bar Association to sort of offer a variety of geographically, demographically, even by practice area, of lawyers that might like to help perfect democracy. So that's why we're really pleased to have started this initiative. Cynthia, before I talk more about this, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered everything. I would add that we need to also acknowledge the fact that in addition to the partnerships that we both mentioned that are very much engaged in this work, that we are working as well with the National Bar Association and affiliates, the state and local affinity, and other diversity bar associations as well, to build on lawyer attorney participation in helping to secure the vote.
No, I think that's totally correct. And so
I'm glad you mentioned those other organizations and the partnerships.
I'm sorry?
Elizabeth, you were saying something?
Oh, no, don't finish your question. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask specifically with respect to the collaboration with other organizations and affinity bars, how specifically can lawyers get involved? What are the steps lawyers need to take to get involved in election protection work or wanting to protect the democracy for the midterm elections?
Well, that's perfect, because that's actually what I was just going to start answering. So that works out well. So we have, to start, we have a website It's ambar.org/perfecting democracy. And so again, ambar.org/perfecting democracy, one word. If you go to that website, you can sign up and we'll get in touch with you and help you get involved. So, but to back up a little, to sign up for that, you know, the whole premise of perfecting democracy is lawyers and people who work in the legal profession have certain skill sets that we think could be well applied to voter protection work and these other things for redistricting, voting rights litigation. You know, so to be really clear, you don't have to know anything about election law to get involved. Really, all you need is a drive to make a difference and a passion to do that. Because, you know, say you're a transactional attorney, right? You're a corporate lawyer, but that work can be well used in these kind of endeavors. You know, maybe you can help nonprofits with, you know, ethics compliance, right? With board trainings, with things that can help them move forward as an organization to do this important work. For a group, if you're a litigator, you know, if there's voting rights litigation going on, you know, you're well suited to do that kind of work, right? I mean, I've done policy my entire life. You know, litigation is not something I've ever done. So, you know, that wouldn't be great for me, but for someone who knows, you know, how to take a deposition, how to do those sort of things, that would be great. For redistricting, lawyers, legal professionals, you know, they're leaders in their communities and they're experts. And so as communities are beginning to redraw districts, lawyers could, you know, provide a great role by assisting and helping redraw districts. You know, they have a better sense perhaps of what the real community is, you know, as you're saying, and there's software and there are different ways to do that. Lawyers could help do that. Lawyers could help testify before redistricting commissions, you know, using that as advocacy. So there are just so many ways that we can make a difference. So to be really clear, all we need are people who are passionate about this and who want to help raise the ability for members of BIPOC communities and all communities to take part in the process. Because, you know, that's how we perfect democracy, by making it open, by making it fair, and by just having a process that everyone feels comfortable participating in. So that would be my long answer to your short question.
And I would add to that also that we also want lawyers who will make themselves available on election day. We would like for them to make themselves available on election day. We would like for them to either be a part of rapid response teams or be at the polls or be ready for emergency motions and other things that need to be done to ensure that folks who are being denied the right to vote or their rights are being violated on site at polls, that they are there, that they can help poll watchers and others understand what the rules are and how they can move forward. So I think in addition to all that Elizabeth has said, the other anchor to that is actually being available on election day.
So to that point, could you tell lawyers who may be wondering, do you have to be licensed in the state where you're doing this work, or can you go to states where you're not licensed to practice law?
It is preferable that you are licensed in the state, that you are actually going to engage in litigation, let's say, or something that's related to litigation. However, if you happen to be in a state and you did a mail-in ballot and you happen to be in a state and you are more than willing and happy to be at a polling place, you can be there to offer general guidance. Okay. But if anything goes beyond that, then it's more preferable that you are actually licensed in that state.
That makes sense. So I wanted to ask a question that we keep hearing and discussing throughout the country, but could you share with us, what are some of the specific barriers that you have seen in your work around voting rights that makes this work so important, particularly in this time that we live in? Well,
I think you have voter ID requirements where election officials use false claims of rampant fraud, voter fraud, to strictly justify the requirements that they're putting in place, such as a physical street address is a huge discriminatory action against groups that are more likely to have PO boxes, or the homeless, or a lot of Native Americans, based on living on reservations, have access to PO boxes and not necessarily a home address. And so that's an example of a voter ID requirement that would be a problem. Lack of language access is another one. The English language requirements, though they have, by the Voting Rights Act, been pushed aside, but they are being used in many instances in ways to limit, because you continue to provide persistent barriers to increase voting around language minorities, especially in the Asian American and Latino communities. Voter roll perjuries, that's another example, where you use the guise of reviewing voter rolls to remove duplicate names and names of deceased individuals, whereas actually you are indiscriminately purging other voters at the same time and deleting millions of eligible voters and deleting their names and using it disproportionately to impact communities of color being able to vote. Polling place closures and consolidations is a very big issue. Recent USA Today analysis found that election officials have closed thousands of polling places, largely affecting communities of color. A lack of funding for elections. There's a lack of funding inhibiting the ability of localities to manage elections that ensure that everyone's vote counts equally. And some of these problems came during the 2000 presidential election in Florida, and we've seen them moving forward where, you know, if you aren't funding elections appropriately, therefore you don't have the resources to actually ensure that they're being held properly. Provisional ballot requirements is another example. The federal law allows for voters whose eligibility is in question to use provisional ballots, and they are to be counted once the voter is confirmed eligible. However, we find that many localities have set their own rules and how many provisional ballots they'll print, and in training poll workers on how to actually process them. And that's another example of how lawyers can be very effective on election day, being at polling places and helping. Reduced early voting. States and localities have long used early voting to reduce election day crunch and allow for many to be restricted in missing time from work or what have you, to be able to vote at a different time. Now with reduced early voting, that is a very big problem. And faith-based groups used to use souls to the polls and all of that. And some of that is being restricted in certain areas. With reduced voting hours, that goes to the reduced early voting. All of that makes it difficult for those in low income and working class families to have access. They have less freedom to arrive late or to arrive early to take advantage of the ability to work. Obviously, we don't want to jump on poll workers, but many of them are poorly trained to be prepared for some of the challenges that are coming their way. And now, in addition to everything else, they're being faced with intimidation. They're afraid to come. They don't know what it's going to end up being, whether they'll be able to leave the polling place safely and get home. And we go into partisan election administrators and creations of at-large local offices to dilute minority votes. And we can go to a number of other things, but I think those that I've named are at the top of the things that we're primarily concerned about when we're addressing barriers in securing the vote.
Well, you've definitely hit several of them that we've heard about and continue to see that are pervasive throughout the country. Given those barriers, how many lawyers do we need to do this work during this midterm election? Do you have a number in mind? And what do we have a goal in mind?
I think it would be very difficult to put a number to how many that we need. I will defer to Elizabeth if she has a number. I think that I can say that we have been underrepresented in doing our job and our role in securing elections. And I think that as attorneys, and I think that we have an obligation, I think an ethical and moral obligation to become more involved and engaged. And I think that the more the merrier, you know, we really need as many as possible. And that would be my answer. Elizabeth?
I guess I would say the more the merrier, but I want to be really clear, right? So it's also very important to get people who will do the work, because it's one thing for us to be able to collect names of people who are interested, and as part of our trainings, and we're developing a series, 2 monographs on voting rights and redistricting. We will do our best to prepare lawyers for the kind of work that they can expect. So, you know, I think you can never have too many people trying to help perfect democracy, but, you know, we want to be really clear that we need a real commitment for people to do this work, because it's so important. So to that end, as many as we can get in as many different ways, because, you know, this work goes, you know, Cynthia had a great point, right? We need people who are committed on election day, but the reality is this is a 24/7, 365 day a year proposal, right? We need people to keep going. So we obviously need as many people we can have on election day, but after that, the work doesn't stop. And so we need people who have this commitment and want to do it. And we will connect them with the groups that will train them and put them in the right place. You'd asked a question earlier about whether or not someone needed to be licensed in the jurisdiction. For some of this other work, you probably don't need to be. I had a conversation with someone at the Native American Rights Foundation, and they were saying they would love lawyers who might, you know, litigators or people who could help with depositions in Indian country, right? Mm-hmm. So who can sort of go travel to where they need them to be. So, you know, there are opportunities like that. So again, I'm not quite comfortable putting out a number, but I just, you know, it's the enthusiasm, and really, you know, Cynthia has written amazing, you know, articles about this, but, you know, I've heard her say so much before about this ethical obligation that we as lawyers have. And so that's what we're trying to harness that, right? And give it a place to go, and also do it in an effective way. We're not trying to do this on our own. We're trying to connect all of you with the groups that are on the ground in your communities, or with issues that you are passionate about. And that's what this is all about. So as many as of you that want to sign up, we will find a place for you to do this important work.
That's right.
Your comments, Elizabeth, remind me of the quote from Charles Hamilton Houston, who talks about lawyers being social engineers. So that ethical obligation is really important at this critical time. Cynthia, you touched on some of the economic issues around how elections are underfunded. As you know, as you both know, the focus of this year as a section is on economic justice. Could either of you share your thoughts on some of the economic justice issues around voting rights that you think are problematic, that we need to be aware of and address moving forward?
Well, Cynthia, I'll start, and then you want to chime in, or do you want to start?
Well, my answer is very short, and I'm sure that you that you will add to it. And my answer really is that those with fewer resources, meaning time, money, information, are priced out of participating due to factors such as election timing, voter identification requirements, felony disenfranchisement, and inefficient election management. And I think that goes back up to what we were discussing earlier in terms of the barriers to securing the vote. And all of those barriers feed right into why there is an economic justice component to the failure of this country to ensure every eligible citizen the right to vote.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. And I'll just expound on that a little bit, right? I mean, I think people think, you know, I'll tell a story that I find myself telling a lot recently when I wrote an article about, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, about voting rights. You know, I think a lot of people think, well, I have a driver's license, right? I have a car. It's easy for me to vote. Well, why isn't it easy for other people to vote? And the reality is not everyone has a driver's license or even a government issued ID, for varying reasons. And that makes it difficult. The other thing is I'm also really lucky. I live in Fairfax County, which I have now come to find out is the third most affluent county in the nation. I drive 5 minutes to vote. I don't have to wait a long time to vote. My right to vote has never been called into question, fortunately, but that's not the same for everyone else. And I think as a starting point, it's very important for people to realize that your experience voting is not everyone else's experience voting, right? And I don't have to wait 6 hours to vote. And when we talk about economics, there are some individuals, I've always been fortunate to work in an organization that gave me the time off to vote. And 2 hours would be, although sometimes depending on where it was, 2 hours would be more than sufficient. And if I went over, it wasn't a problem. I wasn't docked on my pay. But you have hourly employees, you have people who cannot take the time. Because if you talk now, where we have situations where people wait, 2 to 6 hours to vote. That's not even counting the time that it takes you to drive to the polling location, right? There are some people, they can't afford to lose a day's pay. It's just, and I think people don't realize that. And then, Cynthia had mentioned earlier, we're talking about people who live in very rural, remote parts of the country. Perhaps if you live in Indian country, depending on the election, you are having to drive upwards of 100 miles, maybe at the low end, just to, get your mail ballot or just to get to the polling place. And that's something that I think most people don't take into consideration. And then COVID has sort of put another layer on top of this. And Juan, you talked about mail balloting. I mean, it's the same thing. If you, I think some barriers that we are seeing now is, people tried, by and large, most jurisdictions tried to be as inclusive as they could during the 2020 election, knowing that people were afraid to go to polling places and whatnot. And what we're seeing now is they're pulling back a little bit on that access. And so there's something called third-party ballot collection, which would enable either people who live in nursing homes or people who live in a reservation, or even maybe people who live in more remote areas, where people are allowed, say you and Cynthia vote and you put everything in the ballot, and all I do is I help facilitate the process and I return it so you don't have to make that trip. We are now seeing some jurisdictions trying to roll back that ability for different people to do that. So it's, these barriers, they're all around. And so, there are economic considerations. Cynthia and I have also talked about even just the sense that when you're looking at legislation that is going forward now, that impacts people's ability, right? Or they don't engage because they don't believe the process is in their best interest. They don't, I've heard the expression before, if you're not at the table, you're either going to be on the table or on the menu. And I think there are people who look and they don't see that their best interests are being served by the process. And so they choose not to engage. And so we want to do things that make people understand that it's important for them to engage and just to make them feel like they feel a part of the process.
Well, both of you are doing tremendous work in this space, and I'm so grateful for your time. Due to our chair chat limitations on time, we consider this a chat, not a CLE or a panel discussion, but it's such an important topic. I want to end here by asking Cynthia or Elizabeth to remind us how to sign up, where to sign up, and what's the process to get involved.
So the easiest way to sign up is we have a website. It's ambar.org/perfecting democracy, one word, ambar.org/perfecting democracy. And there's a form on there. Just sign up and let us know. And we promise we will get in touch with you, because we're just so excited to provide this opportunity. And honestly, to give people a way to help perfect democracy and, to to just be a part of the process and to help other people be part of the process.
Well, Dr. Cynthia Swann and Elizabeth Yang, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your commitment to this work. And we just want to encourage everyone to, one, go out and vote, and then sign up to be a lawyer involved in this election protection work. It is so critically important as we continue to do the work to protect the rule of law and voting rights and our democracy. Thank you both for being my guests today. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.